This second section, which is asymmetric 4GW, which is asymmetric fourth generation war, let me give you a slide here of some of these various terms. I'm putting up a slide which has a few terms that you may have encountered or may encounter in the next few weeks, and I will send out some brief vocabulary as I did with Vietnam. So these terms that you're seeing here, as I put this up, I'll talk about them. So I'll give you a chance to take this down. Asymmetric warfare is, you'll see this picture of David and Goliath here that I've stolen from some religious site. And this is typically how asymmetric warfare is characterized, which is struggles between small forces, David's and Goliath's, massive forces, which are usually imperial. So in this case, you don't want to be Goliath in a David and Goliath battle because it doesn't go well for Goliath, right? Goliath of Gath, who's this monster, and David, who will be the king, goes out to meet him with his sling, and he chooses a stone, and he knows he's gonna kill this guy, and that Goliath doesn't really have a chance. So, in fact, there's a book by Colonel Thomas Hammes called "The Sling and the Stone," because this characterizes the strength of the little fighter, basically, who is fluid and moves quickly. And same old issue, right? Small fluid, fast guerrilla forces, large static forces that have every tool they possibly can have and are burdened by them. So that's asymmetric warfare, where basically the sides are not equal; they're asymmetric. This side has a lot of power, this side has none, and yet at the same time, this side with no power may actually be in a stronger position. 4GW is the short form for fourth generation warfare, which is the same kind of thing in many ways. If you hear 4GW, you're also looking at asymmetric warfare typically, because you're fighting, you're powerful, and you have to fight down to the level of the insurgent. Fire and Forget Weapons, that's the name of the book that I've taken these stories from, Fire and Forget. And it's the same thing with Kevin Kovite's name of Kovite's story is When Engaging Targets Remember, which is a sort of warning to soldiers. It's part of the beginning of instructions on weapons. When engaging targets, remember to get out of the way, is sort of the moral of that story. So Fire and Forget weapon is not unlike the Stinger missile that I showed you pictures of, or whenever that was. For me, it was yesterday, I think. But it's a weapon that you basically can fire and then run away. And there's enough time between you firing it and it landing for you to actually get away, is the theory. So these they're called man-pads, man-portable devices, which are these big missile launchers that you carry. They're portable. They've got one shot in them. And the idea is, if you have to, that you fire the weapon like a tube. So let's say you've got a tube over your shoulder that has a rocket in it, and then you throw the tube down and run, because you're firing it and forgetting it. The weapon does the rest, because the weapon's intelligent, because it has a computer, or a number of computers in it, a number of chips in it, which are guiding it, and it can be flown by somebody else, or it's smart enough to fly to its target on its own. And some of these missiles are. You take a picture of what you want to kill. It gets coordinates from GPS. You fire it. You get out of there, basically. So that's a fire and forget weapon. And so obviously, this becomes a metaphor for these soldiers, where their job is to fire, but then they have to go home and forget the fact that they were ever at war, if they're going to live. That's the idea. Of course, you can't, but that's the sort of notion that somehow you can forget having been at war. And then COIN, as it's called, which is just really the first two letters of the first of each word, counterinsurgency. And Coyne has his there are whole theories around counterinsurgency, how you fight one, what do, how do you get people on your side, how do you recruit them, how do you keep them, how do you know you can trust them, and so on. So there's this huge theorizing about counterinsurgency. Most of the stories in Fire and Forget glance, if briefly, at the way that America fought this particular war, which was called Fourth Generation War, which is really, again, a guerrilla war. So it's sort of problematic that it's like Fourth Generation is like, you mean the same thing as the Vietnam War? Because this looks very similar in many ways. An enemy that uses unusual tactics, isn't afraid to hide in a civilian population or use them as what do they say, living shields, human shields, and won't stand up for a fight unless the odds are good for them, which drives the big force drives Goliath, not just like where is the equivalent me, like where is the other giant that I can bash away at. There is no giant, right? There's a bunch of mosquitoes. You're like, these mosquitoes are driving me. So although there hasn't been a great deal of work done on, say, the motivation of suicide bombers, well, there's been more done now. It's the same sort of issue as like, well, the United States had to figure this out. They were like, well, what is the psychological mindset of somebody who is promised? It may be something as simple as that his family, or his or her family will be taken care of. It may be that simple. So, in the case of America and the coalition on the ground in both Afghanistan and Iraq, there are no more powerful armies in the world than these particular militaries. That is, these are the most powerful militaries in the world, with their high tech on land and on sea and especially in the air. So this. The United States and the NATO war machine, that's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, of which Canada is a signatory, is up against soldiers who have probably no training and very few weapons and very few rounds in a gun. So this collection refers to and is a metaphor for basically what the soldiers of empire face, and that's why I call this section Imperial Grunts. It also was the name of a book by, I can't remember, a Canadian, I think. Okay. And obviously the titles here were chosen for irony. I mean, most of these texts are deeply ironic. There are a few that are sort of straight up attempts to narrate what it is to suffer from PTSD. The story about the trains is one of those. It's not a bad story. It's just very traditional. And so Kovite says, and there's sort of this reference to destroying narratives because everything is ironic. I mean, they can't take this stuff seriously. And he says, while smaller bullets punch holes in humans, the 50 takes them apart. This is a 50 caliber machine gun on 167. The 50 caliber machine gun is one of the oldest weapons that's still on the field, and it's still one of the worst. Where I mentioned this with the Vietnam stuff, being hit by a 50 caliber, the shock to the body is often enough to kill a person, whether or not the round actually does. It's such an enormous hit. I mean, the size of the slug is so big. So you don't have to particularly aim the weapon. You just need to sort of hose an area down with it. And it just tears bodies apart. How bad it is indicated by Clay, where he says, you're going block by block, fighting with rifles good to 550 meters, but you're killing people at 5 in a concrete box on page 39. So here's a weapon which is good out to, half a kilometer, basically. But you're not shooting from half a kilometer. You're shooting from 5 meters. So what happens to the body when you shoot a weapon that is good to half a kilometer and you're only 5 meters away? Well, it's going to disintegrate it's going to be bad, and you are going to be and in a concrete box, because these are small in their houses. They're going house to house in some of these cities, and they're breaking in. They're breaking down doors or blowing down doors, and they're rolling in, and killing. It's often killing civilians because they're just there, and they're like, oh, well, who are you? Well, that's it. They make a move, boom. But they're small rooms, and they're concrete, so the gun goes off, and you're immediately deaf. Everybody's deafened by that, and you have no idea what's going on. You're just shooting. Now the troops were trained for fire discipline. That is, don't shoot until you have a target. But all you need is somebody who gets rattled, and that's not going to happen. The guys aren't going to be afraid. Soldiers aren't going to be afraid. They're not going to. Anyway, so if the weapon. So what you've got is these soldiers who are stuck in these situations. Which the U.S. starts to call coin, where it becomes sort of this battle of wits, essentially, where what if your enemy, for instance, calls you a tip and puts you into the center of a civilian population on purpose, and you're all adrenaline jazzed up for a fight, and there's no target. What if you hear a car backfire or something like that? What are you going to do? Are you going to start killing and cause a massacre, and then it's going to be bad for the reputation of your army? That's a victory for the enemy. So Kovite says on page 170, the idea is to use your own humanity against you. If you are fast on the trigger, you will end up stopping car bombers but killing civilians, doing Al-Qaeda's work for it. If you hold your fire past the point of no return, you will start to get hit more often as Al-Qaeda realizes that convoys are soft targets. It is the other asymmetry of this type of asymmetric warfare. Heads, they win. Tails, you lose. Right? So the thing about a guerrilla war, as you have learned from Vietnam, is that you have to play the long game. You have to be prepared to make massive sacrifices. But also you don't engage unless you're going to win. So you just have to wait. So once the enemy is inside your head, and in this case they are successfully inside these soldiers' heads, well, that's not going to end when the shooting stops. You're going to go home, and you're going to still have that. You're going to still be dealing with that.